Woe to Ariel, the city where David encamped. Add year to year, but I will bring distress upon Ariel. With mourning and grief, you shall be to me like Ariel. So David had supposedly, according to Isaiah chapter 29, from the beginning, had encamped around the city of the Jebusites. So when you read about that in 2 Samuel chapter 5, it says something kind of interesting in the Amplified version. It says in verse 8, chapter 5 of 2 Samuel, then David said on that day, whoever strikes the Jebusites, let him go down through the underground water shaft to strike the lame and the blind, who are detested by David's soul because of their arrogance. So for that reason, they say, the blind and lame Jebusites shall not come into the royal house of Israel. So some of the commentators will talk about the all too familiar ban, which means wholesale destruction of everybody. But you know, as well as I do, that if one of the seven nations is the so-called Hittites, then you have Uriah the Hittite in his camp. And this is what powerful David will do, is take over someone else so that in the most noble way he can be given this right as king. And he did this through his constant faith, such that he destroyed the lion when he was protecting the sheep. And when he invaded Jerusalem, he was like the lion. So this is something you see in the wilderness. The weak and the lame, they're called the blind. They get picked off. The lame and the blind. What's funny, because Christ Jesus in John chapter 9 heals the blind man, and then in chapter 5 here it says, now there's this in Jerusalem, the sheep gate, a pool called Hebrew Bethesda, with 5 porticos, which I think a porch is, and a large number of the ill, blind, lame, and crippled. One man who's there has been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been ill for a long time, he said to him, do you want to be well? He said, get up, you man, walk. And this was, according to Jeremiah, something strictly forbidden. And so you have these blind and lame, and it says that they had this kind of superstition where the angel would stir the water if you're the first man there. But it's kind of ironic, because how's the first person to be the quickest one there to get this limited amount of grace? Somebody that people don't think deserve to be afforded any grace. And especially here it is on a Sabbath, everyone's probably at church or something and not really worried about this guy. And this video is about the Red Heifer. So, but when David took over the city of the Jebusites, when he took over the position of king from Saul, when Saul had fallen on his own sword, it's very reminiscent of how Israel came into the first place. So let me clear a couple things up first before I go there. First, my last video, it's like, John, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world, that Sheol and Saul are the same word. Well, you might say, oh, John, just look at the Septuagint. It says hell and Hades and this or that, and it says Saul as in the king of Israel. But I'm here to tell you that within 5 verses of Psalm 18, verses introduction to verse 5, mentions of the same word, Shin, Aleph, Wa, Lamed. These 2 words before the Nakud were in there. I don't think that difference is that marked that you can know that these are different, because they were pressed on to the same feats, such as running from death and the Lord coming down and protecting him. And this has a lot to do with his anointing, and he failed a lot of times. I don't know if he took the position of Uriah, and he failed to mitigate a problem between his children, and I think maybe Amnon died, and maybe he was supposed to put his daughter Tamar with his son Absalom or something to perform some sort of levirate function or something indicated with the sword of Tamar and Judah earlier on. But nonetheless, and when I say earlier on, I'm talking about much earlier on. They would say 800 years, maybe, but I mean, it's really a stretch. But when it comes to him taking his place, Uriah and Saul and everything, this also has to do with when it says in Exodus around chapter 12, when they talk about like having the Passover, and what we tell your children is the reason why we do this. It's because with a heavy hand. And so Jerusalem suffered under David when Satan allowed him to number the children of Israel, a pestilence from God and his avenging angel, very reminiscent of the pestilences that happened on the children of Egypt. And then he breaks free from this by being a little bit better than the Egyptians, by not having the firstborn die. So they don't talk much about his firstborn that died from Bathsheba. And then I think Solomon was born, or maybe Nathan, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Solomon. But like, so it says, with a heavy hand, he brought us out of Egypt. And then this is something that didn't happen to Israel, or it happened to Judah, because like the story of Abraham and Isaac going up to the mountain, he was spared from sacrificing. So this is where you get into the idea of like the animal being a substitute and in the place. But this is because the priest needed you to work 6 days a week, and then on the 7th they bring what you worked for to him, and he would give you like a kind of barbecue. And they would do this, especially on high holy days and things like that. But they had certain rules, like in Leviticus. I think you had to bring every single animal to them so they could make sure that you weren't like keeping God's portion. Kind of like you'd almost think of it like a tax. Like you'd expect 10%, and so the priest is going to give his 10% to God, and he's going to take your 10%, and this is how the hierarchy works. And um, sometimes it was just a big burn wholesale, such as in like the Red Heifer. Certain like sin offerings, those were supposed to be called what were known as holocausts, which means burnt offerings, that they were burned up completely. And that's what I wanted to get into with Numbers 19 is the Red Heifer. And it's not like they'll say like, oh, this heifer was in Jerusalem and they had to take it over the sheep gate. So, I mean, like in this time of David, they didn't even have, especially they didn't even have what was built up in the time of Herod over the valley, and probably they allowed like the water to go underneath it. This is all before the Hezekiah, especially Herod and everything. And so they'll say, "Oh, we had to get him to," because this is how the Talmud works. They'll say like, "Well, this has to be true, and this has to be true, and this has to be true, and we're legal scholars, so therefore this happened, and that happened, and that happened." They deduce it all, and so they'll say, "Well, the Mount of Olives, which is the immediate portion on the other side of the East Valley, from there's two valleys. There's a South Valley and the East Valley. I mostly talk about the South Valley when talking about the city of David, but the East Valley, uh, this is going to be where they're going to need to bring this heifer to make it outside the gate per the Torah." And they'll say, "Oh, but because the graveyards that were like this is probably where the tomb that Jesus was buried. It's probably this is where Lazarus, they found him. Maybe it was they put them out in Bethphage, and so that they could bury them easily from when they passed away, and the priests could come on and see if they had been cleansed or something." But they a lot of people will say it's for a good reason. A lot of these health prohibitions, the ones in Numbers 19, are mostly for touching of a dead body, and this is for people in general. I mean, when you read about Leviticus, they talk about several prohibitions like that, but this one seems to be for any and everybody. And so the Eleazar, who I think represents Aaron, because I think it's his firstborn, which is the name Lazarus, by the way. And uh, he says unto Aaron, so basically tell your sons, meaning tell the high priest line, to carry on his tradition, is what that means. That given to the Eleazar the priest to let it outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. So when it says in his presence, doesn't mean he's doing it. This might have been written in the time when they had Gibeonites to do a lot of this, but somebody was there. It was probably a whole group of people. I mean, the priest was wearing white underneath his scarlet and crimson and purple and everything. So um, it was. I mean, to deal with a cow or a heifer. I mean, rather it would. She can't be milked or anything, but supposedly. So definitely a heifer. I mean, probably be. She'd probably be resisting. I mean, to take one out by herself. But people probably did all this. I mean, people probably took their own offerings out. That's why the priests in Leviticus would have to say stuff like, "Oh, if you do, you're offering it to the goat demons," meaning some kind of other priest. We're not getting a cut of it, and somebody is. And this is kind of hard for the wilderness folk that felt very akin to this because it just so happened that the sea people took over. So a lot of the settled land along the coast, even when the Syrians took over, it was already kind of spoken for. So it really developed amongst kind of the more Bedouin desert folk. So to have these nomadic people not allowed to decide when to slaughter their animals, to bring them in, and this is Eleazar. So when they bring them outside, somebody might stumble upon uh, one of these animals, and also this is where they might throw some other sins away because people, because this is a sin, they're not going to want anybody to know. So they might like hide the bones. So it says like right here in one of the ways to get unclean here in Numbers 19 is that if they touch a bone, it says somewhere in here, yeah, right here in verse 16. Moreover, anyone who in the open country touches a dead person, whether he was slain by the sword or died naturally, or who touches a human bone, a grave, shall be unclean for 7 days. So if they stumbled, it says in Deuteronomy that if they stumbled upon a dead body, um, likely it'd probably have some like rocks over it. Probably somebody made a poor attempt. It's not really good. The hill country is not really real good for digging up, especially in a time when people didn't have as much of technology to do so, uh, or be able to afford to. Especially people are committing murder. It usually happens amongst a more destitute kind of person, which is unfortunate. Like a lot of these crimes, people that have seen a lot of horrible things in their lives and get kind of landing up in prison because they got in with the wrong group, and if they would have had different things go different path, they might not have been that bad of a person and have to be in that situation. But nonetheless, it says here if you stumble upon a body, and uh, this is the thing with the law is that it's illegal to kill, right? So supposedly everybody has this law. It goes back to Adam. They'll say in the Mishnah, maybe, who knows, but we all have courts. They say is one of the no hakai no laws is that we all have courts, and we do. I don't think it has anything to do with Adam any more than humanity in general, and I think that's what the word Adam means. But I mean that the law doesn't solve everything. Legislation, you have like in Louisiana a legislative uh, legal system for their courts, and uh, much inherited from the days when Napoleon was down there. Maybe not down there per se, but I think maybe before the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Rebellion, there was a short time that Napoleon had taken the area back from Spain or something like this. And Napoleon was very influential for the separation of church and state. And uh, when it comes to the heifer, it says the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Um, Everything apparently, and then he'll take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn and throw them into the fire, which the heifer is being burned. The priest should then wash his garments. He's unclean. And the guy who burned the heifer, he's unclean. So entirely, they'll have to do 7 days where they're unclean, and then they're supposed to wash. I don't know why they're not supposed to wash their garments and wash themselves on the first day, and then maybe do the sprinkling potion thing with the hyssop. Maybe do that on the third day and seventh day or something. But for whatever reason, I think they were more worried about the camp. So they say, well, someone's gonna go out there and check on him and see how sick he is in 7 days, and then if he's not like sick, then we'll wash him, have him wash, and then come back again. And it says, whoever touches the dead body of any human being shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the third and seventh day, and he shall be clean again. But if he fails to purify himself on the seventh day, he shall not be clean. Anyone who fails to purify himself after touching the body of any deceased person defiles the dwelling of the Lord, and shall be cut off from Israel since the lustral water. So lustral water, I don't know if it's like supernatural, like when you talk about the potion, like it says in Deuteronomy, that if an adulterous woman, they have certain legal rules, such as, oh, you paid this money for this bride, and she's supposed to be a virgin, so there was no blood on the sheet, which is not even a real standard. I mean, it's substandard. I mean, there's some truth to it, but uh, nonetheless, they, when it comes to adultery, that's against the law. So a Jewish woman is accused of adultery. So she's got the law. So it's not that the law makes you righteous, because you can uh, know what is sin by the law, but not power not to do sin. And that's why there are consequences of sin. That's why it's written into the law. That's the legal code. And so, I mean, there would be serious punishments for adultery, and therefore, if somebody was accused, it's a very difficult situation to put the king or the priest in. In the Torah, it would be the priest. In days of like Solomon, would be the king, and in days of Moses would be the Moses. He was a judge, and in the time of judges, you have like kind of leaders that would speak somewhat prophetically at first, but more and more seem to not have any inspiration at all. But when it comes to the cleanliness, so the adulterous woman, she was supposed to drink this concoction that was supposed to, if she had sinned by committing adultery, then her belly would swell up. Well, it's kind of funny because swelling up happens to be um, what a belly does when the encounter has more lasting ramifications naturally. But so that maybe that's when it would become something that the priest would regret deciding against if something were to manifest. But maybe they were thinking just the accusation, she'd be scared enough to stop. But this is what they call the lustral water, And mind you, this is way out in the camp. This is Camp Torah. Uh, it's not Jerusalem Torah. I mean, a lot had to transpire to build the temple. This. It doesn't talk about the temple. It's not. This is not part of it. And what the Talmud says about the red heifer and the temple. I mean, this has nothing to do with the temple to begin with. And maybe the New Testament authors knew this, and maybe there's some truth to the rabbinical sources that say the Mishnah was already orally spoken. Maybe with the popularity of the Jerusalem temple, especially around the time when the Romans were there, that the people who were really um, patriotic would say, they would overhear them say these kind of things about how they purified the temple or something. But this has nothing to do with that. This has to do with purification of people from the lust for water. And it says, this is the law: when a man dies in a tent, everyone who enters the tent, as well as everyone already in it, shall be unclean for 7 days. Or if a lid falls, if a vessel falls out of a lid attached, so you're supposed to sprinkle the garments with this purifying water. And I mean, that's a good move. Like, Catholic priests got that. They got holy water, and people, having something physical, they feel like they're getting something for their money. Oh, I've been working 6 days. On the 7th, I come to temple and I bring the food and I get to eat some of it. It's like, oh, but he's got the holy water. I don't got that at home. And but this is very reminiscent of Jesus, because one, he was sacrificed outside the tent. Two, his name is basically an equivalent or an anagram of Esau, which means the red one. And so, because the Jewish religion is against child sacrifice, against the biblical religion here in the Bible of the Old Testament, that the Christians descend from, is not about sacrifice. It's, yes, the ancestors did that, and for all parties included, but we've it's almost not telling the story of a nation, it's telling the story of all the nations where they've kind of ontologically evolved beyond that, and nobody was really excluded. And it happens today, like in India, they don't want too many women to be born, or something like that, because of how the sexism is really out of hand there. And they say it was like that in uh, Arabian Peninsula before the Prophet Muhammad came there. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they'll tell you. Uh, but it says that this heifer was supposed to be perfect. This is supposed to be a perfect heifer, without blemish. And Jesus's righteous perfection is kind of symbolic of that. And how they sprinkle it on you and you cleansed. This is supposed to, he's supposed to put the blood right at the edge. And so this is supposed to be like what it represents Jesus to a lot of people, because instead of having an animal who you depend on, and it was a sort of fascination, because desert nomads that have cattle, they really depend on these animals, and some even go as far as to worship them, and others drink every part of them. And it's just a huge part of their life. And they even went to worshiping it at the symbol at a point in Exodus. It says, and sorry, let me take a drink of water. So I wanted to fast forward to Psalm 109:9. And this is the Psalm of David. It said, "May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow." So this is the same David that is where Jesus was helping people down, trying to catch a break. You want to be close to the water. If you're like a weak animal, you'd want to be close to the water. Well, David, like a fierce animal, is picking them off, like a lion, uh, waiting to crouching, waiting to destroy. That this is if you read Job, the story of Job, this is Satan's role. He's able to take people's life. That's how come God had to tell him that about his servant Job. You can do anything you want to him, but don't touch his person. Well, he did touch his person. He inflicted his person every way. So therefore, person must mean life. So if he had to tell him this time, don't take his life as an exception because he's such a special person that's going to be put through a mighty test, then I mean that's how we understand Satan, even in the Old Testament, when he went into David and it caused destruction. He went to Saul, caused destruction, and even in the New Testament, went into Judas, caused destruction. But if you go to Exodus, well, we know in James, of course, it says that helping the widows and the fatherless is undefiled religion. And if we look at Exodus 22:24, it says, "If you lend money to one of your poor neighbors among my people, you shall not act like an extortion to him by demanding interest from him." And in 21 it says, "You shall not wrong any widow or orphan." And when you go to Psalm 86 and the verses 12, it says, "I will give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forever." I don't know why I read that. It's translated as God's. Okay. So I guess I guess why I wrote that down was this happens quite a bit. Like if when you go to look up God in Psalms, it will say Elohim, Elohim. But if you look at it when a so-called Gentile speaking, even one that's getting dreams from God, when he says Elohim, it's translated gods, gods. So it's the translators who are taking the liberty to translate one god, the other gods, when they're the same word. And now this isn't even one of my arguments from the vowels points in the code. This is an argument strictly from this exact same word. So, like in Genesis 31:30, when Rachel stole her father's idols, all her gods, it's the same word as when David says uh, gods. So I'm going to David says God. That is. I'm going to Second Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 9. It says, "We are reminding you that we celebrate the Feast of Booths in the months of Chislev." What does that mean in Fourth Maccabees? I'll have to pull it up some other time. It must have been in Fourth Maccabees or something. 210 maybe? Just as Moses prayed to the Lord, and fire descended from the sky, consumed the sacrifices. So Solomon also prayed, and fire came down and burned up the Holocaust. So Solomon, like Moses, was able to call down fire from the sky to burn up these animals. Was I supposed to be looking at 19? So many books in Maccabees, I don't even know them that well. There's four of them. When our fathers were being exiled to Persia, devout priests. So when they go to Babylon, they're calling it Persia, because Persia rules all of Babylon. Of that time, took some, and these guys came from Persia. So Babylon, a province of Persia, is where these people came from. So they're saying, when we got exiled to where we came from, and hid it secretly in the hollow or dry cistern, making sure that the place wouldn't be unknown by anyone. I think they're talking about the fire, maybe. I don't know. They hit like a fire. They hit like a fire down there for like 490 years. I don't know. Oh yeah, peep this last button, please. Second Maccabees 2:12. It says, Solomon also celebrated the feast in the same way for 8 days. 8 days. So this is supposed to be in Jewish, celebrated for 8 days. I think it's supposed to be like the Easter. We're supposed to celebrate Easter for 8 days. And I want to end with Genesis 28:20. Oh yeah, but what I was saying was they had like rules for, oh, you're not supposed to murder, and rules, you're not supposed to commit adultery. Well, when people do, it's like they're almost more likely to lie, because right in where they're looking up, oh, I committed murder, I know I'm not supposed to do that, and then they only got this cliff notes, 10 Commandments, and it says, yeah, you're not supposed to do that. And it's like, oh, you just like, while you're like looking at it, it's like, what is this? Thou shalt lie. It's like, that's an interesting idea. And so that's what they do. Like when people get caught for murder and homicide and things like that, they always lie. They always lie. And a lot of people, it's almost like their belief to get you to believe the lie, and then it becomes the truth. And this is like the ultimate Satanism, because it's like 2.0. It's like instead of getting you to lie, it's gotten to the point where it's getting the lie to become the truth. And now we all have to believe the nonsense and lies, and they derive kind of some satanic pleasure from this kind of reversalism and revisionism, and they always feign innocence, and they always take steps to conceal their crime and do all that nasty stuff. So, like, one bad idea leads to 100 others, and then all of a sudden they get a 200-year sentence because they've got desecrating this and conspiracy that and everything else, you know. So, um, this is what Paul says, that the law in him arose all manner of concupiscence, kind of, because it wasn't that he thought to do those things of itself, kind of like it was the law gave him the idea to. And I don't think that having a law say you can't do it is going to uh, change you from doing it. I mean, it might just change how transparent you are, how much deception you go through. So thou shalt not lie, yada yada yada. What else is new? It's like people lie all the time, but for people like me that try to keep it pretty honest, like that's it. It just makes it so we can't trust these kind of people. It's like, yeah, certain people just lie all the time, and it's it's not something you really want to deal with or be around, you know. It's to kind of just break ties with, because it just makes things much too difficult, and it's usually emblematic of something much deeper. So, like, you know, young ladies out there, if some guys telling all these things that don't seem to be true, get out, like, because it's usually emblematic of a much deeper psychopathy to be lying like this. And these people that want to revise truth and get people exonerated from all these violent things and satanic things they did, it's really this kind of reversal, making bad good. And it's not just in word and deed, but also in reversal. They have to flip everything on its head. It has to be like the lie has to become the truth. It's not just enough to lie anymore and then just say, whatever, you're a liar, we can't get you, moving on, we'll get you for something else. It's like, all right, you won. You just argue and argue and argue until you're blue in the face and you're really smart. So fine, these guys are out of jail, we know they did it, but, and I don't see how you know they didn't do it, you know. But, and why every time there's a bunch of Satanists, they know these satanics didn't do it without even looking at it for very long. They're all well aware. And so it says here in Genesis chapter 28, and the verses are 20 and 21. It says, Jacob then made this vow: if God remains with me to protect me on this journey I am making, to give me enough bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I come back safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. This stone, I shall have a memorial abode and everything. I'll give a tenth part to you. I'll give a tenth part to you. So it's like, hey, God, that's me again. Yeah, yeah, the guy who's been like lying and lied to my own father. And, you know, Job, not even an Israelite, doesn't have the Sabbath or something that's supposed to make him so much greater than everybody else. Oh, let's look to this guy for law, so he can teach you that you can't have the Sabbath, but that's what makes him great. And so, but here Job is making Holocaust for his kids. He doesn't have the priest and everything. He's a foreigner. He's from ancient times, and uh, and then God the Father. He's got all these sons of God come up to him, Satan being one of them, and so he had said, "Oh, because I might have sinned." So this is kind of like a parallelism where he say, "Oh, I'm gonna um, cover over my children with this blood of the animal," like Abraham and Isaac, kind of just this substitute, and this substitute represents the Egyptians and Canaanites that in the New Testament, or sorry, in the Second Temple, it became the Judahites. They would say how they replaced the Israelites, and then you have uh, it says then Jacob sent then Isaac sent Jacob on his way, and he went to Padan Aram, and Laban, son of Bethuel, the Aramean, brother of Rebekah, mother. What was I gonna say? Yeah, but he's basically saying, "Oh, yeah, you'll be my God if you give me this. Oh yeah, I'll work for you if you give me your daughter." And then he got played at his own game. And next thing you know, Laban's cursed or something. Or is it in the Bob? I don't know. I gotta go. Adios.